Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're talking about something pretty incredible. How some of India's most marginalized communities are taking the nation's most powerful legal document and turning it into a tool, a shield, even a weapon in their fight for basic human dignity.
And look, to get right into it, let's start with this question. It was posed over 600 years ago by a poet named Sairabai, who came from a so-called untouchable caste. Her words just cut right to the very heart of this long struggle, asking something that still resonates so powerfully today. So what this explainer is really all about is how groups that have been pushed to the very edges of society, people like Adivasi, India's tribal communities, and Dalits, aren't just passive victims of injustice. No, they are actively fighting back, just as they have for generations. And in the modern era, where do they turn? Well, for many, the answer is a single document. They look at the Constitution of India not as some old, dusty rulebook, but as a living, breathing promise of equality. So how can a document, just paper and ink, fight back against centuries of injustice? Well, inside of it are these core principles called fundamental rights. And these aren't just suggestions, they are rock-solid guarantees available to every single Indian equally. Let's look at two of the most powerful tools in this constitutional armory. First, you've got Article 17, which doesn't just discourage untouchability. It abolishes it flat out and makes it a crime. Then there's Article 15, which acts like this broad shield, banning discrimination based on who you are. But here's the thing, and this is so important, these rights don't just work on their own. They have to be invoked. You have to actively call on them, use them, to force the system to pay attention and deliver justice. Okay, so that's the theory. But what does this actually look like in real life? Let's zoom in on the story of a young man named Rothnam. His story shows you exactly what it means to invoke your rights when you're under incredible pressure. So here's the situation. In his village, there's this big festival every 5 years, and it involved this ritual where someone from his Dalit family had to wash the feet of priests and then bathe in that same water. It was passed down through generations, and incredibly, it was framed as a great honor.
But Rafam, he was different. He's only 20 years old, he's studying engineering, and he sees this ritual for exactly what it is, a violation of his dignity. He argued that his family was only forced to do it because they were Dalits. So he said no.
And you can probably guess this did not go over well. His refusal sent shockwaves everywhere. The powerful castes in the village were furious. They thought his education had made him defiant. But even his own community was terrified, worried they'd lose their jobs and anger both the powerful villagers and the local gods. And the backlash? It was fast, and it was brutal. The powerful castes ordered a social boycott. Nobody was allowed to speak to or work with his family. And then, one night, men came into their part of the village and set their home on fire. Rothnam and his mother barely escaped. But now, think about it, their home is literally in ashes. Their own community is too afraid to help them. Where do you even begin to fight back? He had to turn from social pressure to the power of the law. Right. He couldn't rely on his neighbors for support. So he did what the Constitution allows every citizen to do. He went to the police station to file a case using a very specific tool designed for exactly this kind of fight. Rothnam filed his case under a very particular law, a much more focused weapon than the broad constitutional articles. It's called the Scheduled Castes and Scheduled Tribes Prevention of Atrocities Act of 1989. And this law, it was born from struggle itself. You see, this law didn't just appear out of nowhere. It was forged in the fires of the 1970s and 80s. A new generation of Dalits began refusing these so-called caste duties, just like Rothnam did. The backlash was violent. So they organized, they protested, and they demanded a stronger law from the government. This act was the result. And this is what makes this act so powerful. It's not about vague ideas like, don't be mean. No, it gets horribly specific. It lists out these terrible, humiliating acts of violence, things you can barely imagine, and it makes each one a punishable crime. So by invoking this law, Rothnam's personal battle became a public cause. The media picked up the story and he became a symbol for Dalit resistance. The public pressure became so intense that the village had no choice but to cancel the ritual. But, and this is really important, this isn't some Hollywood ending where everyone lives happily ever after. Even though the ritual was stopped, the powerful castes continued to shun his family. They were eventually forced to leave the village. The fight was far from over.
And it's so important to remember, this struggle isn't just about one community. Adivasi, or tribal activists, also use this very same act as a shield. They use it to fight to protect their ancestral lands from being illegally taken over, sometimes by huge corporations or even by the government itself.
And this brings us back to where we started, with these poets who, centuries ago, were challenging the very foundation of these ideas. Just like Sorabai, the poet Kabir was basically saying, true knowledge, true purity, it comes from within, not from some made-up social status. So what's the big takeaway here? It's this. Having a right written down in a book, or a law on the books, that's just the first step. It is absolutely essential, but it doesn't automatically mean that right exists in the real world.
Because making those words on a page mean something, well, that takes constant work. It takes the courage to struggle, the patience for negotiation, and the sheer will to organize. It's about changing not just the rules, but the hearts and minds of everyone around you.
Which leaves us with one final, pretty powerful thought to chew on. The law can provide the armory, the shields, and the swords for the fight. But the battle for dignity, that's won by the courage of people like Rothnam, who dare to pick them up and wield them.